Good evening. Today is March 26, 2026, and it is 11 p.m. U.S. Central Time. My name is Rinaldo J. Aguilar Marcano, and this is Declaration 131. 131. Um, and Yeah, so I have to apologize in advance. I'm driving. I'm gonna check out a couple of things that I want to see. Um, so when I get there, I might you know change the topic a little bit, um, and I apologize for that. But I don't think I'm gonna cut it into different pieces. Um, so anyhow, this for this demo, I have a few things. One of the main things I want to do is to tell you a little bit about the evolution of this. I'm working on a kind of a special project these days, and I want to tell you a little bit how it evolved. Okay, I didn't prepare notes for this part, um, but it's like probably the highest possible altitude um, that I think I will ever talk about, right? But I want to like give you a kind of an account um, of not only of the thing itself, but of how the project came to be and how it evolved. I want to give you like the train of thought and the sequence of events of how they unfolded. Because I think at the end I arrive at the best possible situation, right? But I didn't arrive at that situation at the beginning, right? So it was kind of I had to debug the thing a little bit, right? So to recap, um, on the on demo 130, we talked about um, how Tyler Technologies, this company that it's a public company that um, that trades in the New York stock exchange, and how that company, it's a company that runs the state courts in more than 20 states in the U.S., which is a big operation, right? It's a $13 billion company. Um, and we talk about how, at least here in Texas, it's been used to enable a network of corrupt judges to target people to advance the agenda of the Communist Party of China and Diosdado Cabello. So basically, to enable this RICO enterprise that the judges here locally have. Um, so that's what we talked about in the previous demo, and then we also talked about that I started looking at where the money came from. I mean, who owns the shares in this company, right? And I came to the realization that it was a combination of companies like Vanguard and BlackRock and State Street, um, among others, right? But like those are the big investors, the biggest investors. Right? Like if you sum them up, all the three of them, they sum up to something like 40 something percent of the shares. So like almost $6 billion in the market cap of Tyler Technologies comes from these three companies, right? So I said something to the facts in the previous demo that that it seemed to me like um, what the Communist Party of China is, Chinese Communist Party is doing is using the investments of Americans to finance these companies that at the end undermine democracy and liberties and of Americans, right? So it's using our own money to attack us in a way. Right? So that's where we left off. But after that, right, I started like debugging this deeper, right, and thinking more about this and looking at metrics and looking at public data, really, from the filings of these companies, right, of Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street, and similar companies. Right? And I realized a series of things, right, that are interesting. Then I took a series of steps. Okay. So one of the things I noticed is that um, let me tell you how this evolved, right? So first I realized that, right? I realized what I told you, that um, these companies invest heavily on Tyler Technologies. And this is important for them, I mean, to concentrate the ownership, right? Because they wouldn't want a set of shareholders making a decision that could expose that Tyler Technology. I mean, that could make a decision that could result directly or indirectly, in Tyler Technologies being exposed, because that would expose, hundreds of these judiciary actors that are committing fraud every day, right? So they can't have that. Right? So that's why they have to have tight control. And that's probably the explanation of why the mix of investment in this company is abnormal, right? Because it's by design. They don't want anybody investing in this company, right? I mean, they keep it as, um, um, something that is not common knowledge, right? I mean, the existence of this company and how successful it is. They keep it on the wraps by design to not, give anybody the power to vote, right? So, this got me to think about this thing of the power to vote, right? And this is an interesting concept. And I'm not gonna go too much into details, but I'm gonna say it because there might be people that will listen to this that are not from the United States, right, and may not be familiar with this concept. So this concept is the following. In American companies that are publicly traded, there are usually multiple different types of stock. There's common shares and there's also shares that have the right to vote, right? And there's also another type of shares that, like for example, in the case of tech companies, this is very common, where the founders have founder shares, and those shares have 10 times the power of vote. So, one founder share, for example, could have 10 votes per common share, things like that. So the power to vote is a thing, right? Like this is important because if you want to place the CEO of a company, there has to be a vote, and then if somebody proposes a CEO, the majority of the shares have to vote, and that has to be approved, right? So who places the CEO depends on who has control, right, of over the voting shares. So this led me into a path that is very interesting, right? Let me see what's the best way to phrase this, because I discovered many things, different things, right, that are very very important. Uh, so the first thing that I started looking at, because like I've asked myself this question for a long time, like like because I have the database, right, that Diosdado Cabello gave me in 2024. I know that many CEOs of many important American companies are marked in this database with crypto payments. I know this. This is a fact. Like, I don't know, to give you an example, right? I mean, I don't want to make a list here because I'm going to leave somebody out of the list, and But to give an idea, right? The CEO of Airbus. I mean, that's a very important company because they manufacture aircraft, and that CEO, I haven't checked if they already changed it because when I publish the things, they change the CEO. And this has happened in the last 2 years a lot with many companies, right? But I don't know. Let me tell you, the CEO of 2024 of Airbus was marking the index, right, with a lot of crypto payments. I don't know if they changed it already. I haven't checked. But so many of these CEOs are marked, right? So it was a mystery to me how they did this, right? Because they cannot possibly own so many shares in so many companies to be able to place all these CEOs, because we're talking about thousands of CEOs, right? So it was a mystery to me how they did it, and I think this is the answer. I mean, this thing that I discovered, or this thing that I discovered because my curiosity was awakened by the realization of Tyler Technologies and all that, right? Uh, so so this is what I discovered, right? So one of the things that is that Vanguard, for example, like let's talk about Vanguard. they are an investment company, right? So they have these investment plans and products, right? Like that, basically that track different indices, and this is kind of an aggregator, right? Like what they do is they assemble these portfolios and then they sell you stock in the portfolio. Instead of you buying, a stock of multiple companies, they produce a mix, like a recipe, right? And they constantly rebalance the portfolio to hedge for risk and things like that, right? And to optimize for alpha gains and things. So they sell you stock in the portfolio, right? And so you buy, VTX, for example, and that has a price. You buy that, and they do the work under the hood, right? You don't know exactly. I mean, you can go and check what is the composition of the product anytime, but if you don't go check, they're not going to be telling you every 5 minutes, right? And they might do even high frequency rebalancing. They could be rebalancing these things multiple times per day. But you see, what this is really creating is a situation in which Vanguard, through these products, own the stock in multiple companies, right? So, for example, VTX, that product, could have a stock of Apple, a stock of Google, a stock of Meta, a stock of Shell Oil, a stock of ExxonMobil, like multiple companies, right? And you are buying VTX. So you're giving the money, right? You're the one putting the money, the capital, and taking the risk. But the shares are owned by Vanguard, and therefore Vanguard has voting power on all those companies, right? So this is the real weapon, and this is how they change the CEOs. They create these products, these investment products. People put the capital, and then they get voting shares. You see, and by having the voting shares, they can, influence the decisions of these companies. But this is not all. Don't leave, because it gets much better. But this is a principle, right? I mean, this is the main principle. But they do it in different ways as well. It's not a single avenue. There's multiple avenues to this. Okay. So one avenue is through these investment products that I'm describing, right? The second avenue is through one second. The employer-sponsored retirement plans. Like, for example, in the US, this is called 401ks. Right? So these plans that are employer-sponsored, they have certain rules, okay? Like, for example, and certain benefits for the employee. For example, they can they deduct this money pre-tax. You don't pay tax on the money that you're going to save in this way, right? So the way it works is that, for example, when I was employed at Google, Google hired Vanguard, and Vanguard was the manager of the 401k plan for Google. So they created this 401k plan for Google, and employees of Google that wanted to participate, we would get deducted from our paycheck you could elect the amount of money, and there's some limits and stuff, but I think it was something like $21,000 per year, right, that you could contribute. But imagine, Google has 150,000 employees, right? So if you do the math, it's a lot of money. And there's a lot of incentive for employees to opt into these plans. But it's the same, right? So you're putting the capital, the employee, right, is taking money, the company is taking money out of the employee's paycheck and giving it to Vanguard. And then Vanguard puts it in the 401ks, and the 401k buys a stock in multiple companies, including the same employer, right? So in these 401ks, the 401k for Google could own shares in Google, for example, right? But what's happening is that the entity that is holding the shares is Vanguard, right? In this example, for the 401ks, for the retirement plans. And this is different from the investment products like the VTX that I described before. This is a different product, right? This is a retirement plan. But the one that holds the shares in this example is Vanguard. It's not the employee, and it's not Google. It's Vanguard, right? So Vanguard has votes via this 401k. Votes in the board decisions of the companies where they invest this money, right? So far we have two avenues, right? The investment products that Vanguard creates, and also the 401k plans of the employers that are sponsored by the employers. uh, and then they buy stock on many companies, including the employer, right? So I mean, this right there already creates a dangerous situation. Why? Well, because I mean, it's a circular situation, right? It's a conflict of interest because the employer is hiring Vanguard, right? So Vanguard, in a way, is the provider of the employer, and Vanguard is providing a service to the employers and the employees, right? The employees of the employer that could result in a monetary gain, right? But at the same time, Vanguard has an incentive to keep the contract because they're making money and they're getting voting power, right? They're getting capital that they can transform into voting power in multiple companies from these employers and its employees. So they have an incentive to try to keep that relationship going. But at the same time, they are buying shares on the employer, and they have an important amount of shares that could affect the decisions of that employer, including who is the CEO and who is the chief financial officer, for example. And the chief financial officer would be the person that ultimately will decide who would be the provider of the 401k plans, right? So I mean, they have the power. If they accumulate enough shares, they have the power to put in the chief financial officer position the person that would decide or that could decide on the continuation of their own contract. I mean, this is a tremendous conflict of interest, right? But don't leave because it gets even better. Now, compound to this the following. It is a common practice in many industries that companies, publicly traded companies, buy shares in other companies that are competitors. So, for example, Google would buy or could buy shares in Apple, right? And this is a way, so if Apple does it better than us, we don't go broke, right? Because we will make money out of Apple, right? That's the idea. And there's certain regulations, how much money or how many shares you can buy on your competitors. Like these things there's some guidelines and some regulation, right? Because you cannot, take control of the competitor this way, because it would be an antitrust violation. But remember, so what I'm telling you is that, for example, Apple may own shares in Google, right? But remember that Vanguard, when they get these investments via the products they sell or via the 401k plans, they buy shares in many companies, including Apple, right? So now they could have an important stake on Apple, who in turn owns shares on Google, right? So they could also exert indirect control on Google, who is they're providing a service to Google, right? I mean, they're a vendor to Google. But they have now, up to this point, four different ways of exerting control over Google, and important decisions like who is the CEO or who is the CTO, right? So it's already, a very dangerous situation in terms of conflict of interest, right? But don't leave because it gets worse, or better. I don't know. Depends how you say it, right? So in the United States, at least, there are regulations of how many shares you can own on a company without being considered an insider. And this is important because if you're considered an insider, there's a lot of requirements that you have to fulfill in terms of reporting when you sell or buy shares. And also, it has tax implications. Like if you're considered an insider, you have to pay taxes that would not be applicable if you're not an insider, right? Like you're considered part of the company, basically, right? But here's the problem, right? The problem is, this is the most problematic thing, is that because of this practice of owning shares in your competitors, right? Imagine, let's talk about the search vertical, right? So imagine, I'm talking about search engines, right? So imagine that, for example, you have Google, Microsoft, some Google search, Microsoft Bing, Yahoo search, and I don't know, another search engine, Yandex, right? I don't know. I don't know if Yandex is traded in the U.S., but imagine that it is, right? For the sake of the example. So imagine that each one of these own, I think the percentage, don't quote me on the numbers, but I think the percentage for to not trigger the threshold of being considered an insider is 10%. So imagine that each one of these companies buys or owns shares on the amount of 9.99% of shares on each one of the competitors, right? So, you know, Microsoft owns almost 10% of Google. Yahoo also owns almost 10% of Google. Um, Yandex owns almost 10% of Google. And what's the other one? I don't know. Amazon owns almost 10% of Google, right? So in aggregate, and Meta owns almost 10% of Google. So if you sum them up, they own almost half of Google among all of them, right? But then Vanguard also buys 10% on each one of them, right? So now Vanguard has a way to influence all of them individually. And if they influence all of them individually because they in aggregate own half of Google, they can effectively, I mean, Vanguard can effectively replace the CEO of Google at any time. That's what it means, right? But it gets worse. Because remember I told you that Vanguard has the ability to buy shares, right, on their investment products that they create using using that vehicle, right? And they could also buy shares as a company. Like they can say, we want to own 10% of Google. They can do that, right? But they will be careful not to go over the 10% threshold because then they will be considered an insider, right? But this is where it gets really, really bad. Is the following: it turns out that the shares that um, that are being bought using the 401k plans that are uh, plans of the employer, basically of Google, right? In this example I'm giving you. So the shares in Google that are bought via the 401k plans of Google are not counted towards the limits to be considered an insider, right? So what this means is that if Vanguard, through the 401k plans of Google, buys 10% of Google, and on top of that, they buy another 10% through the regular investment products that they sell, Vanguard could hold up to 20% of Google and still not be considered an insider. You see? And this is problematic because remember, Google is, I mean, they're a vendor to Google. So they're a vendor and they could be controlling up to 20% of the votes in the shareholder meetings. I mean, it's crazy, right? It's a conflict of interest that it's tremendous, right? And remember, there's also the compounding effect that they could do the same with other employers. So they could also maybe, right? I don't know. I haven't checked, but they could have the 401k plan of Facebook, of Meta, right? And also own 10% of Meta through the other avenue. And that way, control 20% of Meta, and Meta could own 10% of Google, right? So they could accumulate this effect and get 30% of the votes. Just one company, Vanguard, right? But surprise, surprise, BlackRock is doing exactly the same thing. And State Street is doing exactly the same thing. So you see, these three companies in reality are capturing entire verticals horizontally. When I say verticals, I mean industry verticals, right? So what they're doing is capturing entire industry verticals in a horizontal manner with this technique that I'm describing. So when I see this, it's a profound realization, really. But as always, as I told you in the previous demo, when I see these things, because I know that once you understand the mechanism, it's really easy to disable them. I mean, the attacks, whatever they are, right? Because all these attacks that they do are based on loopholes like this. Like, I mean, there's obviously a loophole here. The loophole is that the SEC keeps counts on how much stock you own in a company, but they're not keeping track of the stock that you have under management. It's not being counted as a stock that you own, right? Because in reality, Vanguard doesn't own that stock, but they have it under management, and because they have it under management, they can vote using that stock, right? So it's a loophole in the regulation. Like the regulation did not think of this, and also the regulation did not take into account that you could be controlling other entities like the competitors, right, or another company that owns a stock. So indirectly, you could be exerting control over votes in that other way, right? So it's a distributed. What I'm trying to say is that the SEC regulations did not catch up on time with industry. This is what happened, right? The SEC regulations did not foresee that they could be doing a distributed attack on the stock market in this way. Right? But by doing this, by capturing entire verticals, they can effectively replace all the CEOs of all the American companies, right, in this way. And it doesn't take much capital because they're using the capital of the employees. Right? The employees are paying for this. And yes, so I'll tell you another thing later, right? But so basically the employees are paying for this, right? And then they're using the capital of the employees to get all this massive number of shares to vote. Right? And with those votes, they can replace the CEO, right? They can replace anybody. They can affect company policy. They can affect their roadmap. And it's also problematic, right? Because with this technique of capture that I'm describing, they are controlling it's an antitrust violation in reality, but it's not being done by the tech companies. It's being done by the 401k vendors, right? By the investment companies that are really aggregators. But by being aggregators, they can effectively control a vast amount of votes on the shares without putting down any capital, right? So this is a tremendous vector of attack, because if you think about it, these companies are not putting any money down, and they're controlling the majority of the votes in the board decisions. They have the best of the two worlds, right? We take all the risk, but they get the votes, right? So as I was telling you, when I see these things, I immediately go into a mode of, okay, how would I disable this, right? And it's not because I feel like I have to disable it, but I don't know, just as an academic exercise, right? I started thinking about this, and I thought, well, when these people do these things, what I've learned is what you have to do is they're like children, basically, right? Like you have to take away the candy. That's what you have to do, right? So how do you take away the candy here? Well, the loophole really is that the person that is putting the money to buy the shares is not the person that is getting the right to vote, right? So, for example, when I was at Google, employed by Google, I was putting down the money on every paycheck, to contribute to my 401k plan, but then Vanguard was voting on my behalf. This is the loophole, right? So what I did, I proposed to the SEC a rule. So the SEC has a mechanism called request for rulemaking. And this is stipulated in the law, right? Any citizen can request a new rule, right? Of course, this doesn't mean that they're going to create the rule, right? But at least I requested it, right? And the rule I propose is very simple. The person that should be able to vote is the person that is putting down the money, right? If I'm putting down the money, I should be able to vote. And then you could say, well, they will say, Vanguard, right, and BlackRock, they will probably say, well, but you're putting the money, but we're buying fractions of shares, right? But I could give a fraction of a vote, and then they could aggregate them, and then when you get a full vote, they vote in that way, right? There's technical solutions for this, right? Or they will say, well, it will take a lot of effort and time to vote. This is not true, right? They could build a simple app that you can vote using your phone, right? If there's gonna be a replacement in the CEO of Google, and I'm an employee of Google, I would want to vote on that, right? Obviously, because it affects my life. But no, that's not what happened. When they put Sindar in there, I didn't get to vote. Vanguard voted for me, right? And for all of us. So this is unfair, right? So, but thinking about how to take away the candy, I, submitted that request for rulemaking. And the rule is very simple. The people that should vote should be the people that is putting the money, right? But then, of course, this creates a potential problem, which is, say that they pass this rule. I don't, to, I'm not overly optimistic about this route because I know that if the SEC proposes a rule like that, Vanguard will sue the SEC, right, for constitutional, citing constitutional violations and things like that, right? So this would take 3 years of litigation for something like this to pass. So I'm not very optimistic, but at least I took that step, right? But imagine for a second that a rule like that is put in force. What will happen, I think, right, is because now Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street will see that all those shares have no voting power. They will want to dump the shares, right, and this will affect a bunch of American companies. So I propose another rule change that makes it impossible for them to dump the shares if the rule passes, right? Like it puts like a cooling period that they have to hold the shares and they have to sell them in chunks, right, in the stages. So to protect the public, right? So that's the first thing that I did, right? But then, after I submitted this request, is that I realized that they were also double voting in a way, right, without being declared an insider, because they have the block of votes from the products that they produce, like the VTX fund, for example, and they also have the block of shares from the 401k plans that they sell to the employers, or that the employers sponsor. So like they have basically multiple blocks of votes, and they don't trigger. They go above the 10% and they don't trigger the insider designation, right? So here I also thought, well, how do I take away this candy, or how do I help take away this candy, right? And here I did the same. I proposed another rule change, which is, well, that if an entity is voting using multiple avenues, even if some of those avenues are shares that they don't own but have under management or under supervision, if they're the ones making the voting decision, that should be counted towards the computation of the percentages for the Rule 16, I think is the number, right? Which is the rule that decides whether you are an insider or not. So, for example, in the case of Vanguard, if they have control over 15% of shares, they should be considered an insider, right? That computation should be such that there is no room for interpretation, right? They should be written in the rule, because the rule doesn't say it. Right now, today, it's an interpretation. Somebody interprets the rule and makes this interpretation that they're not an insider, right? So, if you put it in the rule explicitly that, if they have voting control over more than 10% of the shares, they should be considered an insider, right? Then there is no room for interpretation, and this wouldn't be a problem, right? They wouldn't be exploiting the loophole because they wouldn't want to be considered an insider for obvious reasons, right? It would make their business model impossible because they would have to report every share they sell, right? And they can't do that because they rebalance these portfolios multiple times per day. Sorry, one second. So I also proposed that rule. That was the second rule I proposed, right? And then what happened next was that after I'm, in this train of thought, I thought, but wait a second, there's something that is fundamentally wrong here. Is that somebody made this decision, consistently, over years, right? The decision that, because, Vanguard, for example, has to file forms with the SEC saying that they have, say, 9% of ownership on Google stock, and they have to file other forms that say that they have these 401k plans and that they're buying Google stock as well in there, right? So somebody at the SEC had the two pieces of information, right? And they could have done the math and compute that Vanguard is controlling the votes of 15% of the shares, and say, well, you're an insider. I mean, somebody could have made this interpretation, right? This interpretation that they're an insider. But this interpretation has never been made in 16 years. I'm saying 16 years because I started having the Vanguard plan the 401k plan for Google, sponsored by Google and managed by Vanguard on 2011. And I still had it until 2025, I think. Like, so 14 years. And it pre-existed before I joined Google, right? So over 16 years, nobody has made this interpretation, ever, that Vanguard is an insider within the context of Google shares. So what this means is that the SEC is consistently interpreting this rule in a way that it's, at the least questionable, right? Because they obviously are controlling more than 2% of the shares via these different avenues, right? Direct avenues plus the indirect avenues that I described that are not, I'm not counting them in my analysis here, right? In this hypothetical scenario for the SEC, right? So it seemed to me like this is a structural problem at the SEC, meaning, how is that the SEC? I mean, if me, being a person that I don't have formal training in economy, like the training I have is because when I joined Goldman Sachs, the people at Goldman Sachs set me up with an instructor who was also a managing director, same as me, and an economist. And his name is Tao Ni Wing. And I believe he's the grandson of that military figure from Burma, Ni Wing, with the last name Ni Wing, right? He's the grandson of Ni Wing, of General Ni Wing. And he's a manager, or was a managing director at the time, and maybe he's a partner now, I don't know, right? And he was assigned as my economics professor, right? He was giving me and Charles Elkan classes 2 times per week or something like that. And that's the amount of training that I have on economics, right? But what I was going to tell you is that if me, a person that doesn't really have formal training in economics or economy, and it's only an engineer, right, can see this, right, that they are obviously exercising a voting power that goes above the threshold, but are not being considered an insider. How is it possible that the SEC did not see it, right, in 16 years or so? It's odd to me, so this seems to me like a weakness in a way. One second. Yes, so but because it's been a long time, right? I mean, it has happened for many years, right? I mean, the consistency of that interpretation made me wonder, right? If there's maybe, I don't know, an employee that has been in a position to make that determination consistently for a long time. And I started researching that. So yes, it turns out there is a person, like it's somebody by the name Theodore or Theodore. He goes by the name Ted, and the last name is Yu, Y-U, right? And he's an economist. He gives tech talks and things like that. He seems to be very respected. But he's been in that position, in that department at the SEC, that makes this determination for over a decade. And he's one of the most senior people in that department. So I don't know. It's worrying, right? Because this decision, I mean, if these companies, I'm talking about BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street and all those, if they were determined to be an insider over the last 10 years that this has happened, the liability in just a few companies that I analyzed, right, would be over $50 billion, something like that. So it's a lot of money, right? It's a huge amount of money. But the money, I think, is the small potatoes. Like the real weapon here is the voting power, right? Because these three companies together, in this way, control, a huge amount of the voting shares of all the companies in the U.S. Right? So with this, uh, they could place and remove any CEO they want forever, right? So it's a tremendous weapon. I see. Mm, 1 second. Okay. Yes. So I started researching that, right? I found this person that is at the SEC and that has this senior role in the sub department, really, that makes this determination, right? I mean, the determination of whether to consider a company like Vanguard an insider or not, an insider, if they exercise voting rights on more than 10% of the shares. But then, this line of thinking again, I started thinking, okay, so how do you take away this candy, right? Well, it's not that difficult, right? What is needed really is law, right? There needs to be a law. So this, but I'm not talking about a rule from the SEC. I'm talking about like an actual law, right? Like an actual law from Congress that um, that makes it non-discretionary, right? That makes it that uh, this department at the SEC does not have the discretion to determine the exceptions for the aggregator companies like this, right? So if it's a company like Vanguard or BlackRock, because they are aggregators, really, right? So they could be controlling huge amount of capital. So basically, the idea is a law that sets thresholds and above, I can't recall the numbers I said, right? But I say above 100 million. So if the aggregator has business or shares in totally more than $100 million or more than 5% of a vertical, they that would be, then the SEC does not have the discretion to give them. I mean, not the SEC, but this department that is doing this, because right now this decision is being made by a single individual, basically, right? Not by a committee of presidential appointees, right? Like the commission itself. This is right now being made by the person, by one individual. So if you think about it, right, it's a tremendous amount of discretion and power for one person to have, because that person is deciding something that gives the power to Vanguard to remove hundreds of CEOs at will in hundreds of American companies. And this is only possible because this person made that decision, or this is department, right? I didn't see him making the decision, right? But um, I would think that he had something to do with that. But uh, this situation is only possible because this department made that determination, right? On that exception, 16 years or more in a row. Um, so what I did, um, I created a proposal for a legislation. This is a very simple legislation that would make this impossible, right? That would set thresholds, and then a company like Vanguard would surely trip these thresholds, and then the decision of giving that exception would rest on a panel of multiple people that have to be presidential appointees, right? So, and that's important because that brings political risk to the equation, right? So if a set of 5 presidential appointees decide that Vanguard should have the exception, right? They would be concerned with the politics side of it, and they would be very careful in making that determination, right? But right now, because this determination is being made somewhere inside of the SEC, in a department that is not very visible, somebody who's an employee, really, right? Not there's no political cost on this decision, right? So it's a decision that is very easy to make. I mean, there's no risk associated to it. So I proposed that. I also submitted that proposal, right? But it gets even better, right? Because then I started looking at, well, I started thinking, if they're doing this here, they're probably also doing it somewhere else. I mean, They cannot possibly be doing this only here. So I started looking at other countries, right? Canada. I don't know. I don't have the list with me, but if I try to remember it, I would say I looked at Canada, Canada, Switzerland, um, Canada, Switzerland. Wow, what is this company? Canada, Switzerland, Civic Processing Center. So there's a company here called Core Civic Processing Center, and it has a bunch of barbed wire. It looks like a prison, really. Uh, Maybe it's a prison. I don't know. Core Civic, but I don't know. Most of the cars that are parked here are flagged by the system. I have to look at what is that they do. I don't know. Yeah, so I looked at Canada, Switzerland, um, Israel, Germany, France. I mean, at the stock exchanges, right? To see if they had similar problem, a similar problem where uh, they could be doing the same thing, like these aggregators. And surprise, surprise, not only they're doing the same thing, it's the same aggregators. Like for example, BlackRock is also so to give you the numbers, right? So in the U.S. stock market, BlackRock controls in this way that I'm describing $12 trillion, right? So it's double the amount that I told you in the previous demo. And in Canada, it's another $3.7 trillion or something like that, something along those lines. And if you look at, I think it's the UK, BlackRock also has a presence there in the same way, right? Like doing this aggregation of investment in the trillions of dollars, right? And in the other countries, if it's not BlackRock, it's Vanguard, and if it's not Vanguard, it's State Street. But it's the same players, right? There's some other countries like India in which there are other players that I have not seen here in the US. But sorry. But it's the same. But it's the same. It's the same situation. In multiple countries. Like so, this is a really a universal problem, right? I mean, the TTP is basically they use the money from investors to put them in these aggregators, but the real value is on the voting power that they get without having to put down the money. Right? And here I have to tell you, this got me to think on another thing. Is that when I was at Google and I had this 401k that was sponsored by Google and managed by Vanguard, which I had it until recently. I sold it maybe a year ago. Um, the performance of that 401k was amazing. Like during all the years I had it, I don't think it ever was below 10%. I mean, and this is, I mean, for the US, I know in different countries this varies, right? Because if you're in a country with inflation, you would be, with a lot of inflation, you would be used to seeing like returns of 15%, right? Because they have to catch up with inflation, right? But here in the US, the inflation is low, and the returns are never 10%. Like, if you get a saving account, you get, I don't know, 0.5%, maybe less, probably less, right? A fraction of a percent of interest per year. So, getting 10% on an investment consistently over 11, 12 years, it's unheard of, right? So I don't know, like this is anecdotal because I only have my data point, right? But and I also have, I mean, I can compare with data that is public, and I did it. But so it seems to me like this is not random, right? Like, my intuition is that these returns are high by design, are very high by design. Why? Well, because it accomplishes multiple purposes. First, it incentivizes the employees of this important employer. I mean, important because remember, they want to control Google because Google is an information gateway. Many people use Google, right? It's an aggregator on itself. you know, there's more than 1 billion customers in Google that use, or users that use Gmail, right? So if you have control over the CEO of Google, you can control who is the manager or the director of Gmail, right? And that gives you an opening, right? If you're an intelligence network like the CCP, right, or Diosdado Cabello's 7. So that's why Google is particularly important for them, right? So by keeping the returns of the employer sponsor plan high for Google, they are directly incentivizing the employees of Google to participate in the plan and to never leave. And they're also incentivizing Google to stay with Vanguard, which gives Vanguard the voting power from all the shares that these employees and all this capital that these employees are putting, right? And because Google also buys shares on their competitors, they indirectly get voting power or leverage over the other competitors, right, of Google. So, I mean, over the other companies in the same vertical. Uh, so I started looking at why was, my return on that 401k plan so consistently good. And the explanation I found is that probably is because Vanguard gives them certain employers, if they choose to, right? If they want to attract the employer and keep the employer happy, they offer offsets on the fees, right? Like these are like incentives, right? So to trade, to participate in the plan, there are fees that Vanguard imposes, right? In on paper on everybody, right? But they may choose to waive the fees for an important client like Google, right? And to offset the cost and things like that. So they have all these maneuvers that allow to lower the transaction cost, which then turns this particular product that they're offering only to Google to be very profitable, right? But of course, what this means is that because this money has to come from somewhere, it means that somebody else is taking those losses, right? Some other companies, the employees of some other companies are taking those losses, so they can offer those offset benefits to Google employees, right? So I don't know, in a way, right? This sounds to me a little bit like a Ponzi scheme, right? I mean, it feels like you're taking money from one side to keep the other side happy, so they don't leave, right? Um, I don't know. And in fact, like you can see it in my returns, like my returns were over 10% consistently for more than a decade. And I never left for that reason, right? But the other effect that this causes is because the returns are so good, this money grows faster than, equivalent plans of other employers. And because this money is special because this money buys voting power on the employer itself, on the same employer that they are offering this plan to, right? On its competitors, because that employer is going to buy stock, indirect control of the competitors. So it is important for Vanguard that this money grows fast. The faster this money grows is better for Vanguard because it translates into more shares, and more shares mean more control. So you see, this is basically a self-reinforcing loop that has multiple reinforcing mechanisms that at the end, what they produce is that Vanguard ends up capturing the customer, because Google is their customer, right? In a way, they're providing this plan for Google, right? But by this mechanism that I'm describing, Vanguard at the end ends capturing the customer, meaning Google, right? And they control the customer because they can place the CEO, they can place the CFO, they can place the people that would hire or not hire Vanguard. So it's I think that's what they're doing. It seems pretty obvious to me that that's the mechanism, right? So to give you the story short, what I did was that I submitted those requests for rulemaking Uh, I also send a copy of those requests and the entire rationale of this, right, to the equivalent agencies that, I mean, that would be equivalent to the SEC, but in all these other countries, right? I don't know, it's a list of like 7 or 8 countries, right? Israel. I did it by geography, like looking at who are the neighbors of the countries that are running this, because obviously they will want to take the neighbors in this way so they can move the money across borders, right? Like to provide safe haven for their players, right? Like what they do in Venezuela with Colombia, like the same idea. Uh, so I did it that way, and also by the size of the. So Taiwan is another country, right? For this reason, South Korea, Taiwan, Israel, Finland, Switzerland, France, Germany, and the UK, I think, are the countries, and Canada. So I send them a copy of this, right? Because they have the same problem. Um, and then the other thing I did is that, um, one second, because I have to turn here. Yes. So I send them a copy of all these initiatives, right? Like the request for rulemaking, the rationale of why, and basically by sharing these documents with them, they will be able, I hope, right, that they will be able to see the vector of attack, and that BlackRock is a company that is present in all these in all these countries, right, and bingo, and Vanguard and BlackRock and all that, right. So I mean, it's a nuclear situation because they want, I mean, this is going to open, I imagine, right? Because I'm sending this to the departments of, the regulators of the stock exchanges in all these countries, who are, filled with people that are trained in these matters, right? If I can see it, they probably can see it in a second. As soon as they open the email, right? They will understand what this means, and it's going to be in all these countries at the same time. So I mean, this is the same thing I told you with Tyler Technologies and the courts in the United States, right? But now with BlackRock, and it's precisely their size and their dominance of all these markets in this way, which is going to be problematic because this might trigger investigations in multiple jurisdictions, right, in multiple countries. So I don't know. I don't know what they're gonna do with that. Um, and at the same time, I'm doing what I can, right? I'm proposing things that could fix this very easily. uh, all this requires is, I mean, to fix this, the minimum, the easiest way is the request to change the technical interpretation of the SEC, because of the rule for what is an insider, right? To change the interpretation, because this doesn't require introducing a new rule. The rule already exists. What has to be changed is the technical interpretation that Ted Jew is doing every year, right, or every 6 months. And if there is a guidance issued and that interpretation is clarified and changed, then the problem is solved, right? They would be all considered insiders for all the companies. Imagine they won't be able to operate, right, if this happens. And I imagine the other countries could do something similar to that, right? I don't know the regulations in other countries, right? But I can see that they have the same problem from the public data that I can see. Um, so it's an interesting situation, right? This guy is gonna cause an accident. I guess he's making a point. Um, yes. So yes. So I sent all that, and I sent it to people in Oh yes, that's the other thing, right? So I sent it to people in the Senate. I sent it to people in the DOJ. I also, of course, filed a complaint to the with the DOJ to the but with the antitrust division, because this is an antitrust violation, right? What they're doing. I mean, when you think of antitrust, it's usually a company dominating the market, right? Or taking control of the entire monopolizing the market. But this is a bit different, but it's also an antitrust violation because this is an aggregator acquiring shares in a way that bypasses the designation of insider, uh, and then exerting control over not one but hundreds of companies, if not thousands, at the same time. And that's even if there's no coordination among the big three, right? Because I mean, there could be on top of that, there could be also coordination, or well, not even coordination, but like this dynamic would naturally develop into a monoculture, right? Into a situation where there is only one view, because all these people come from the same schools. I mean, the people at the big three, right? They went to the same schools. They worked in the same companies before working on these three companies. Uh, so at the end, this would result. Oh, interesting. At the end, this would result in a situation when there is no plurality of views, and it's only a handful of people controlling not only companies but entire markets, entire industries, really. Um, so I think that's at the end, right? That's really the mean of control. That's really what got this to this point. What enabled this to get to this point. Um, so those that's the state of the game. What is this? You know, there is something here, and they have. I mean, there's like thousands of cars, literally, but I cannot tell exactly how to get to that place. It's like a parking lot, and it's very well illuminated with industrial lights. It's next to the New Jerusalem Whole Truth Church. So this is basically on the back of 6524 Bender Road, Humboldt, Texas 77396. Uh, but it has thousands of cars just parked there, right? And it's Thursday night. It's almost midnight or past midnight. Um, Let me see. Hmm, how do I get there? Anyhow, yes. So that's the state of the that's the state of the situation. So, it's what I was telling you in the previous demo, right? That the situation is escalating quickly, and but also, I gained this understanding, right? Because of the things that I described in the previous demo. Um, I mean, the amount of capital that is involved in this situation, that's the reason why it hurts them, because it gives them a tremendous amount of control. Of course, in the previous demo, until the point I recorded the previous demo, I thought the reason why it hurt it was because of the amount of money, right? Because I was looking at it as if it's their money, but in reality, the reason why it hurts is not because of the money. It's because, I mean, the money could hurt, but it's because of the control that they're buying with that money that is not really being put down by them. It's being put down by Americans. So the amount of control they're getting through this proxy voting mechanism, uh, using the money that is being contributed by American families. So it's a tremendous amount of power that they're getting, right? It's political leverage. That's what it is. So anyhow, I also sent this, I forgot to tell you, to the Department of Homeland Security, because that department has a mandate to protect the country, right, against foreign adversaries, and especially using economic means. So they have a department that watches, the economic operations of the adversaries targeting the U.S. Um, and so I was the reason why I did this is because I was watching the news right today, and I came across this. There was a kind of a live transmission from the president, and he was swearing in a new secretary of the for the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security. And I listened to his speech today, and I mean the person that was being sworn in. His name is complicated to pronounce. I can't recall the spelling, but he was saying that that he was in a mission to protect all Americans, regardless of the color that they vote, which I think is great. And he was saying that um, nobody. He said a phrase that I liked a lot. He said, nobody will outwork me. Like he was speaking about dedication, right, to the job. So like he said those two things that really resonated with me because I know what that is, right? I know what it means to work 20 hours a day, and I know what it means to be agnostic to color. So I don't know. I thought I should give him a shot, right? Um, and like as you can tell, right, this is a big problem, right? And I kind of feel sorry that it's his first day on the job, and I'm gonna throw this huge problem on his lap. But it sounds like if somebody can do it, it's him. I mean, if somebody can fix this, it's probably him. So I sent him a FedEx letter, him and all his team. It's like 5 people. Uh, I also sent it to the DOJ, to the antitrust department. I submitted a whistleblower report to the DOJ. Um, in those things I asked for whistleblower status, right? I mentioned that this network is doing this. I mean, has been doing this thing of keeping my son kidnapped using the courts for a year now. It's gonna be a year in 2 days. Um, and I also mentioned that they secreted my son for 49 days at some point, and all these things that they've been doing, right? And I'm asking for whistleblower protections, right? Because I mean, if what I'm doing is not the definition of a whistleblower, I don't know what would be. On that note of talking a little bit about the legal topics, right? That I haven't touched on much yet. I want to tell you that I remember something that is important because like they've been entering these void orders in especially in the family case, right? The one that they're using to keep the child kidnapped with the courts. Um, Look at how many cars they have in here. Of course, it's a closed parking lot. I cannot get in. But this is 5750 Bender Road. It's a CarMax Auctions dealer entrance. Oh, this is interesting. So it's a CarMax, and it has its own cellular antenna with its own electrical modem. Oh, so that's how they do it. And it has a Texas steel supply, because the Chinese, they like the steel companies for obvious reasons. So yeah, that this is how they do it, right? With CarMax. Interesting. So CarMax is in it. Interesting. Yes. So the thing that I remember is the following. They enter this. So they have this TTP. I described this before, right? Where they have multiple versions of the order, which is illegal, right? This is document tampering, record tampering, really. But so what they do, they create. So say that they're going to kidnap a child with an order. So they create an order that is not really an order. It's something else, like a notice of hearing, but they mistitle it and they send that to the target. So the target doesn't know that there's an order, right? They don't give the order to the target. They give something else. Uh, then they create a second version of the order, which is the real order that they used to kidnap the child. And then they create a third version of the order, which is the order that they're going to give to the DOJ if they need to, right? Uh, if they get audited or something. So they have three versions, right? And then they use Tyler Technologies to hide them all, so they can switch them and give, any order they want to any person that asks, right? So they can decide what order to give to who. And this is why they hide the orders with using Tyler Technologies. So that's why if you go to that, and by the way, this is in the package that I sent to everybody, including the legislators, right? Like the proof of that Tyler Technologies is doing this. Anyhow, yes. So if you look at the docket, you will see that they hide these indices that are missing, right? Those are the orders or documents that they're hiding with Tyler Technologies for this reason, right? So, sorry, what I forgot to tell you is that I mean, I've known this for a long time, but I forgot to say it, right, in any of the previous demos, is that there is a flaw in their TTP, right? Is that because I'm acting pro se means that I'm representing myself, right, in this case. In the Texas rule of procedure, there is a rule, I think it's the 103B. Don't quote me on the number, but I might be wrong, or 101B, I can't recall. But there is a rule that says that if you are a pro se litigant, the court and the other party, the court really, is obligated to physically mail you a copy of every order. This is an obligation, it's not discretionary. They have an obligation to do this. So the reason why the TTP is flawed is because indeed when they created these fake orders, right, that they hide with Tyler Technologies, not fake, because one of them is real, but uh, the different multiple versions of these fraudulent orders, right, that they create in this way to give them to different people, right, depending on who asks. Um, the TTP is flawed because, well, they cannot fulfill that requirement. I mean, the mailing the pro se litigant, me, a copy of the order, because if they do it, then I will have proof that, I mean, they won't be able to switch them, right? Because I will have a copy that provided by them. They can't do that, right? Because they will have to. I mean, if they to fulfill that requirement, they will have to send me a legal notice saying we entered this order for this and this and that, right? And then I would know. I would have a copy of the real order. So they can't do that. So because of this, when they entered these void orders in all the occasions, in this case, over the last year at this point, it's going to be a year in 2 days, they have never sent me any of these mandatory notices, right? So I mean, the orders are void for multiple reasons that I've described in multiple demos before, but they're also void, I mean, they're more void because they didn't fulfill this requirement. They didn't send me the mandatory notice of the rule, 101 or 103B. I can't recall what is the number, but they did not do that, right, in any of the orders. And the reason is that, right, that if they did it, then I would have proof that the order is the order, and I would have the real order. They can't allow me to have the real order because then I would appeal it. The goal with this thing of switching the orders is two things. Three things. One is that the target is not even aware that the order exists, right? Then, if the target decides to appeal or something like that, the target would be appealing the wrong order because the version they gave to the target is not the real order, right? So the target will waste time and effort and, will appear to be crazy. And this is the most important thing. This is a way of gaslighting the target at a nuclear level. Because when the DOJ or somebody comes asking if that happens, what they will do is that they will say to the DOJ, no, this is a crazy person. Imagine, this is a real order, and they will show the DOJ the real order, right? I mean, the one that is compliant with everything. And then they will show the documents that the target filed, complaining or making arguments that have nothing to do with the real order. You see? So I mean, for a DOJ investigator or prosecutor or whatever attorney, right? He will really think, or she will think, that the target is really crazy, because the things that the target is saying in his documents have nothing to do with the order that is being shown to them, right? So it's a way of making the target appear crazy, uh, and that solidifies their narrative, right? That this is just a person that is crazy because they lost their child and they went crazy. Right? It's not that they're criminals and they're committing these crimes and fraud and wire fraud. It's just that this is a person that lost a child and went crazy. Right? And probably, I mean, if they're doing it this way, it's because it works, right? Because they can sell that story. But I mean, that was before the database was captured. But the obvious implication of this, and I'm saying this, in case authorities ever get this recording, is that obviously Tyler Technologies is the mean by which all these judiciary and quasi-judiciary officers are committing wire fraud. So the mechanism of wire fraud, the enabler of the wire fraud, is Tyler Technologies, which is a publicly traded company, and in which BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street have billions of dollars worth of stock. So they have a responsibility to tell their shareholders that Tyler Technologies is a vehicle for wire fraud. They have to tell them. And that's the point I'm making, that I mean, with the regulators and the SEC and all these entities, right? That this is an unescapable responsibility of these aggregator companies, Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. They have to tell their investors and their participants and the employees of the employer customers that they have, like Google, that they have a risk because they have investments on Tyler Technologies. Because otherwise, I mean, it would be a huge breach of judiciary duties, right? I mean, if you think about it, right? Look, assume for a second that they didn't tell anybody, right? I mean, that these companies, the aggregators, decide we're not going to tell investors about Tyler Technologies' risk because of their participation in this RICO enterprise to commit wire fraud at massive scale. Because it's not only me; they do this to hundreds of people. But if they go that road, think about what this really means, right? This means that Tyler Technologies, that the aggregators are taking on the benefit of voting on behalf of the people that are putting down the money, while those people are taking all the risk. And then when they come into knowledge that that criminal acts are being committed, they don't inform the people taking the risk. I mean, it's like they're getting all the benefits and none of the responsibility, right? This is what it would mean, right? If they don't disclose this to the investors, so they have to disclose it. And anyhow, like I've emailed this and sent this in physical letters to so many people that this is unescapable. I mean, they cannot all agree on ignoring what I'm saying, right? This is going to get somewhere very soon. It's obvious to me at this point because there's so many ways that this can, explode, that it's unescapable. So I don't know. I'm gonna take this opportunity to talk to the people at Vanguard and BlackRock that I know. I know at this point because I get information from the Venezuelan informant. I said this before, right? Gossip, basically. So I want to take this opportunity to tell you that maybe it's a good time to talk to the CEO of Tyler Technologies so they return the child. I think that would be the best thing to do, really. You have to roll it back because at this point it's going to just escalate. and I have ammunition to keep escalating it. Like I can send this to more countries, to more regulators, to more agencies, to more federal. I mean, I have no shortage really, because I have all the proof, right? So think about it, please. Uh, it's never too late. I guess that would be my message. So with this thought, I'm gonna close this demo. This was demo or declaration D131. And again, my name is Rinaldo, and I'll see you on the next one.